Let's talk about a real psychological phenomenon. Growing up as the family scapegoat is basically like playing the lead role in a psychological thriller. You're constantly blamed for things you didn't do, gaslit into questioning your reality and expecting to be okay with it. Hi, I'm Angela, and if you've ever been labelled as the difficult one, or perhaps the problem child in your family, not because of who you are, but because you've refused to play along with their dysfunction, then let's talk about the mental health effects of growing up as the family scapegoat. So in this video, we're going to be covering how being the scapegoat rewires your brain and nervous system, the long-term mental health struggles you might be facing and that aren't actually your fault, how toxic family dynamics train you to gaslight yourself, how to start healing and detach from their version of you, how scapegoating damages your mental health, and here's what no one tells you about being the scapegoat. It's not just a family role, it's a psychological program that trains your brain to blame yourself for things that aren't your fault, feel responsible for everyone else's emotions, second guess your own memories and emotions. And when you're the family scapegoat, you don't just get blamed, you start blaming yourself too. And so over time, this rewires your brain to experience chronic anxiety because you are constantly walking on eggshells. Perhaps some people it can be depression too, because no matter what you did, you were never enough. There can be complex PTSD too, because emotional neglect and psychological abuse are just as damaging as physical abuse. There's hypervigilance because you've learned to predict people's mood to avoid the conflict. Self-doubt and low self-esteem as well, because your family gaslit you into believing that you were the problem. And the worst part, even after you leave the toxic environment, the damage doesn't just go away. Your nervous system still reacts to life as if you're in that toxic household. So let's break it down. Why do these effects last even after you leave? So because your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between past and present, unless you tell it, your brain still associates being yourself with rejection. So your nervous system still treats boundaries like a threat, and your emotions still default to guilt, shame or self-blame, even when it's not your fault. Why? Because for years you were trained to prioritise keeping the family happy over your own mental health. But here's the good news. You can reprogram your brain and nervous system to break free. So how do we start reversing years of emotional programming and finally feel like ourselves again? So number one, you can recognise that their version of you is not the truth. First things first, who they said you were is not who you are. Your family's version of you was based on what was convenient for them, not what was real. Maybe they called you dramatic because you refused to be numb. They called you difficult because you had boundaries. Or they called you the problem because they refused to ignore theirs. But now you get to define who you are outside of their narrative. And number two, you can rewire your subconscious to stop carrying their baggage. Even when you know logically that your family was toxic, your subconscious might still be operating on their programming. And that's why doing affirmations, journaling, and even therapy alone can feel really slow, because the deepest programming is happening at a subconscious level. So hypnotherapy helps reprogram the belief systems that were forced on you as a child. It teaches your brain that you are not responsible for their emotions. It detaches guilt from self-care and boundaries, and it helps you feel safe being yourself without fear of punishment. Because healing isn't just about knowing what happened. It's about undoing its effects on your mind and body. And number three, build a life that reflects who you actually are. Once you release their version of you, you get to ask different questions. So what do I actually want outside of their expectations? What do I believe about myself without their influence? How can I start showing up as my real self instead of the version that they forced on me? Because healing isn't just about surviving the past, it's about creating a future that actually feels good. And breaking free from scapegoat programming is a process. One day you're setting boundaries and feeling empowered. The next you're wondering, wait, am I a terrible person for not feeling guilty about this? But that's just your brain adjusting to freedom. And guess what? You're allowed to exist without constantly apologising for it. If this hit home, let me know in the comments, because we are officially done with carrying guilt, blame and trauma that was never ours to begin with. And if you're ready to reprogram your subconscious and fully step into your power, let's talk. Hypnotherapy isn't magic, but it is the closest thing we've got at the moment. And please subscribe for more real talk on healing, breaking cycles and finally living for you. Thank you for watching.